So this is exam review Jeopardy for economics exam 1. So I'm just going to go through and pick these questions. I'm going to go category by category. So let's start with demand for 10 points. How would you show change in quantity demanded on a curve, on a demand curve? It would be movement along the curve. So the answer is movement along the same curve would show change in quantity demanded. What is the law of demand? The law of demand states that holding out everything else constant, when the price of a product falls, the quantity demanded of that product increases. And when the price of a product rises, the quantity demanded decreases. Let's try demand for 30. Name 3 variables that shift a demand curve. So variables that would shift a demand curve are income, price of related goods, tastes, population and demographics, or expected future prices. You just needed to name 3. What is market equilibrium? If consumers expect future prices of oil to be more, what happens to the demand curve? If consumers expect future prices of oil to be more, there'll be an immediate shift in demand or increase, shift to the right, because if they expect an increase in price, they'll buy more now. If coffee and Red Bull are substitutes and the price of coffee increases, what happens for the demand of Red Bull? Well, if the price of coffee increases and Red Bull is a substitute, there would be an increase in demand for Red Bull. So the demand curve would shift right for Red Bull. All right, so let's talk about supply for 10. What is the slope of the supply curve? The slope is positively sloped, or it's going upwards. What is the law of supply? The law of supply states that holding everything else constant, an increase in price causes an increase in quantity supplied. A decrease in price causes a decrease in quantity supplied. When you think about supply, you have to think like a business owner. So what would happen if you owned the business, not like a consumer? Let's try supply for 30. Name 3 variables that cause the supply curve to shift. So 3 variables would be price of inputs, technology change, price of substitutes in production, number of firms in the market, and expected future prices. If the prices of pencils is expected to rise, what happened to the supply curve for pencils now? Well, if the prices of pencils is expected to rise, then the supply curve would shift left or decrease, and they would wait until they could get more money for it in the future. If Coke can produce Coca-Cola or Diet Coke, and the price of Diet Coke rises, what will happen to the supply curve of Coca-Cola? The supply curve for Coca-Cola will shift left, decreasing the supply, because if they can only produce these 2, they'll want to produce more of the Diet Coke, which they can charge a higher price for. All right, moving on to the next category, economic concepts for 10. What is scarcity? Scarcity is the idea that there is unlimited wants which exceed our limited resources available to fill those wants. Economic concepts for 20. What are the 3 key economic ideas? People are rational, people respond to economic incentives, and optimal decisions are made at the margin. What is the difference between a centrally planned economy and a market economy? A centrally planned economy is when the government decides how products and services are produced and who will produce them, and then who will receive them. In a market economy, the firms and households decide who will produce the products, how they will be produced, and who will receive them. So in the centrally planned, the government decides. In a market economy, firms and households decide. Economic concepts for 40. What are the 3 economic questions that every society must answer? This is different from the 3 key ideas. The 3 questions are, what goods and services will be produced? How will the goods and services be produced? And who will receive the goods and services? All right, and finally, economic concepts for 50. What is the difference between allocative and productive efficiency? Allocative efficiency is when production is in accordance with consumer preferences, whereas productive efficiency is when the goods or services are produced at the lowest possible cost. Think about this. If I can produce the typewriter at the lowest possible cost, that doesn't specifically mean that consumers want a typewriter. It just means that I have productive efficiency. All right, so moving on to trade-offs and PPF. What is an opportunity cost? An opportunity cost is the highest value alternative that must be given up to engage in an activity. What is a PPF, or a production possibilities frontier? The PPF curve is a curve showing the maximum obtainable combination of two products that may be produced with available resources and current technology. What causes a shift to the right in a PPF curve? The only thing that would cause a shift to the right would probably be a technology change or economic growth. Otherwise, we can't produce more than we have with available resources and current technology. What is the basis of trade? The basis of trade is comparative advantage. And trade-offs and PPF for 50. What is the difference between absolute advantage and comparative advantage? Well, absolute advantage is the ability to produce more of a good or service than competitors using the same amount of resources. I like to use myself as an example. So I'm very efficient at doing taxes, but somebody else might not. So my absolute advantage is taxes. I could be many things, right? But comparative advantage is the ability to produce a good or service at a lower opportunity cost than competitors. That is why comparative advantage is the basis of trade. All right, moving on. So we'll take GDP for 10. What does the C in GDP equation stand for? The C stands for consumption. Let's take GDP for 20. What does GDP stand for? GDP stands for gross domestic product. What does GDP measure? GDP measures the market value of all final goods and services produced in a country during a period of time, usually 1 year. How would you show changing, oh, sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. What is included in the investment category for GDP? In the investment category, it includes spending by firms on new factories, office building, machinery, changes in inventory. It also includes household spending on new homes. So new home purchases are included in investment. And finally, GDP for 50. Name 3 things that are not included in GDP. I gave a general list, but sale of used goods is not included in GDP. Intermediary sales, so business to business that's not in a final product. The underground economy, so if I'm selling this illegally or not reporting it, then it's not included in GDP. Household production, so taking care of a family, or if I build something at home, the materials are included, but not the value of the labor or the total value of the market idea. And the value of leisure is not included in GDP. So this is a quick overview of exam review Jeopardy. And if you have any questions prior to taking the exam, please let me know.